Don't move, don't breathe, and whatever you do, don't look at her. 6 armed men, a mafia boss on his knees bleeding through his jacket, 1 bullet already in his side, and a woman in a waitress apron standing between him and all 6 of them. Empty hands, cold eyes, and absolutely no fear on her face. One of the men laughed. He actually laughed. He stopped laughing in about 4 seconds. What she did next with her bare hands in a parking garage, outnumbered and outgunned, is something none of those men will ever forget. The ones who lived anyway. Subscribe right now. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story reaches, because this one goes all the way. The first shot hit Luca Moretti just below his left ribs at 11:43 at night, and his first coherent thought before the pain arrived, before the fear, before anything else was Dante. Not the bullet, not the blood spreading warm through his shirt, not the sound of Marco screaming his name from somewhere to his right. Dante. Because in 12 years of running the Moretti family, Luca had survived 3 assassination attempts, 2 federal investigations, and 1 very long dinner with a man who wanted him dead before the dessert course. He had survived all of it for one reason: he never went anywhere without telling someone where he was going. Tonight, the only person who had known was his brother. Boss, stay with me." Marco's hands were on him, pressing hard against his side, and Luca grabbed his wrist. "How many?" he said. "Luca." "How many men, Marco?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough to confirm the number was bad. "6, Marco said. "At least 6 I can see. There's more on the upper levels." Luca nodded once, filed the number, filed Dante's name, filed both of them in a place he could not afford to open right now, and focused on the immediate problem, which was that he was bleeding in a parking garage with 6 professional shooters closing the exits, and his best security man already down to 3 bullets. The car. Disabled. Tires engine. Carlo tried to... Marco stopped. Carlo tried to what? Another pause. Longer this time. "Carlo's gone, boss." The 2 words landed like something physical. Luca absorbed them without moving his face, which was the only thing he could do for Carlo right now, not look like the news had touched him, because the moment grief showed on his face, Marco would hesitate, and hesitation would get them both killed. Carlo Benedetti, 9 years. A daughter named Gia. The worst espresso in Chicago. Later, Luca told himself, "You grieve later." "All right," he said, knew that was when they heard her. Not heavy footsteps, not tactical, not male, not the particular rhythm of trained men moving in formation. These were fast and light and completely controlled, coming from the stairwell on their left, the one that connected to the back of the restaurant on the street level above. Marco had his gun up before the door opened. "Don't!" One word, no panic in it whatsoever. She stepped out of the stairwell with her hands visible at her sides, not raised in surrender, just visible like she was demonstrating a point. Dark hair, black apron, the tired, practical look of a woman halfway through a double shift, and eyes that were scanning the garage with a speed and precision that had absolutely nothing to do with being a waitress. "If you fire that weapon," she said, looking at Marco the way a teacher looks at a student who is about to make a predictable mistake, "every shooter in this building is going to know exactly where you are in the next 3 seconds. Put it down." "Lady, I don't know who." "My name is Scarlett. I work upstairs. And you have 3 minutes and 40 seconds before the team on level 3 completes their sweep and cuts off the only exit that isn't being watched." Her eyes moved to Luca, to his wound specifically, and she assessed it with the same quick efficiency she had used on the garage. "That one needs a hospital. But first it needs a way out. Are you going to let me help you, or are we going to keep discussing it until you're out of time?" Marco looked at Luca. Luca looked at her. In 12 years, Luca Moretti had met a lot of dangerous people. He had a very specific sense for them, something he had never been able to explain to anyone and had long since stopped trying. It wasn't the way they carried a weapon or the way they walked into a room. It was something quieter than that, something in the way they used stillness. This woman was using stillness right now like a tool. "Marco," he said. Marco lowered the gun. She moved without waiting to be thanked. She crossed to Luca's right side, ducked smoothly under his arm, and took his weight with a solidity that made Marco raise his eyebrows. She was stronger than she looked. Significantly. The kind of stronger that doesn't come from a gym, but from something more specific, more practical, more repeatedly tested. This is going to hurt when we move, she said. I'm aware, Luca told her. Good. Don't slow down anyway. She led them into the stairwell. She went 3 steps ahead and Luca watched her right hand, not the railing. She wasn't touching the railing. Her hand was flat against the wall at shoulder height, moving slowly along the concrete as they descended. What are you doing? He asked, feeling for vibration. If someone's moving in the levels above us, the wall reads it before you can hear it. She didn't turn around. Old habit. From what? She didn't answer. They reached the bottom landing. Steel door to the right, the alley exit. She stopped before touching it and pressed the flat of her ear against the metal surface for exactly 2 seconds. Then she stepped back. One man, 8 feet out on the right side. He's not moving, which means he's confident, which means he doesn't know yet that you survived the first hit. She looked at Marco. Take him quietly. No gun. Marco's jaw tightened. I don't take orders from Marco. Luca's voice was soft. Do it. Marco held the woman's gaze for one hard moment. Then he pushed through the door. Luca counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Marco was back. Clear. The woman was already moving. Sweep. The alley was cold, the way Chicago alleys are cold in the deep of the night. Not viciously, just completely, the kind of cold that settles into your bones and informs you without drama that the city does not particularly care whether you survive. Luca kept moving. He kept his breathing measured. He focused on the woman's pace ahead of him and matched it and did not think about how much the wound hurt because thinking about it made it worse, and making it worse was not useful. There's a vehicle 2 blocks east, she said, not raising her voice. Silver Jeep. The driver won't ask questions. You arranged this, Luca said. I sent a text. Before you came down. Yes. You planned for the possibility that we'd need a vehicle before you even knew if you could get us out of the garage. She glanced at him sideways, just a fraction of a turn quick in assessing. I planned for contingencies. That's not the same thing. It is exactly the same thing, he said. Who are you? Someone who saw 6 armed men set up a kill box in a parking garage and decided to do something about it. We can discuss my resume when you're not bleeding on a public street. Luca almost not quite, but almost smiled. The Jeep's driver was young, maybe 25, with a particular trained absence of curiosity that meant he'd been around enough to know that the less he knew, the longer he'd live. He didn't turn around when they got in. He didn't speak. When Scarlett said drive, he drove. Luca sat between Marco and Scarlett in the back seat. The wound was settling into a deep, persistent pressure that he recognized as the body's negotiation with real damage, not the sharp shock of impact, but the slower, more honest communication of tissue that had been seriously wronged. He needed a doctor. He knew that. He also needed to figure out who he could still trust, and right now, those 2 problems were fighting for the same piece of his attention. I need to contact my people, he said. Not yet. Scarlett was looking at her phone, not with the anxious scrolling energy of someone checking for comfort, the focused selective attention of someone processing information. That's not your call to make, Marco said flatly. She's right, Luca said. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when someone says something everyone knows is true, but nobody wanted to hear first. Whoever coordinated tonight knew your schedule, Scarlett said. She still didn't look up. They knew the location, the timing, and they knew how many of your people would be with you. That's not surveillance. That's access. Now she looked up, straight at Luca. If you call your organization right now, the person who set this up gets confirmation that you survived, and they'll know within 5 minutes. You're telling me I can't trust my own people, Luca said. I'm telling you, she said carefully, that one of your people already made a decision tonight, and until you know which one, every call you make is a risk. Luca looked at Marco. Marco didn't argue. That more than anything told Luca how bad this was. There's a safe house, Luca said. North side, above a dry cleaning shop. 2 people know the address. He paused. Marco and my brother Dante. The name fell into the car like something dropped from a height. Scarlett watched him say it. She watched his face the way a doctor watches a patient's eyes, not intrusively, but with the careful attention of someone reading for information that the patient isn't giving voluntarily. And she saw it. Just for a moment behind the composure and the control and the years of practiced steadiness. She saw that he already knew, not suspected, not feared, knew. In the way that you can know something and still be desperately hoping that the next 5 minutes will prove you wrong. She had seen that look before on another face in another life. She knew exactly how much it cost a person to carry it. "Does Dante know about the safe house?" she asked, quietly, not pushing, just making sure the door was open if he wanted to walk through it. "He's the only other person who does," Lucas said. "Then we don't go there." "We don't go there," he confirmed. His voice was completely flat. She understood that the flatness was doing a lot of work. They used a backup location, a place Marco knew, an apartment that Luca had never listed anywhere that existed and no records that could be accessed by anyone with Moretti family connections. A spare key taped behind a fire hose cabinet in the lobby of a building that Luca had quietly owned for 6 years through 3 layers of shell companies. Inside, sparse, clean, stocked. The kind of place that has never been lived in, but has always been ready. Scarlett found the first aid kit under the kitchen sink. She found it without opening any other cabinets first. Marco watched her do it and went very still. She set it on the kitchen table, snapped on a pair of gloves from inside the kit, and looked at Luca with the expression of a person about to perform an unpleasant but entirely manageable task. "Sit," she said. "I'm standing fine." "You're standing because you're stubborn, and that's admirable, but your stitches are going to need to be cleaner if you're not swaying, so please sit down." He sat. She worked quickly and without apology. She cleaned the wound with a kind of efficiency that doesn't come from medical school. Medical school taught you to be careful and slow and methodical. This was something older than that, more instinctive. The economy of motion that comes from having done this when time was genuinely the issue and not just a preference. Luca sat still and watched her face. "You're going to tell me," he said, "that you learned to do this from your grandmother or a YouTube tutorial." "I'm going to tell you," she said, pulling the suture thread through with smooth precision, "to hold still." "I am holding still. Your jaw is moving. That's technically separate from the wound." She looked up at him, a brief, flat, completely unimpressed look, and something about it made him want very badly to keep talking just to get another one. "It's not going to kill you tonight," she said, tying off the last suture. "But you need a real doctor inside the next 12 hours. Clean, professional, no improvised stitches from a woman in a restaurant apron." "Can I trust my doctor?" he asked. And the question was so genuinely open, so unguarded, coming from a man for whom unguarded was not a natural condition, that she paused for just a moment before answering. "That's your question to answer," she said, "not mine." She began packing the kit. Luca watched her hands. "Scarlett," his voice had dropped, not to a whisper to the register that men use when they've decided to say something true. "Why were you watching that stairwell tonight specifically?" 8 minutes, you said." She was quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable, processing, choosing. "3 things," she said finally. 2 men at the bar who ordered drinks and didn't touch them. A black Escalade on level 2 that parked and didn't move for 20 minutes. And the pattern. She glanced up. The way the cars were positioned. The intervals between them. It wasn't random, it was staged. She held his gaze. "I've seen staged before." Where the question was quiet, not aggressive, but absolutely serious. She closed the first aid kit. "A long time ago." "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed, "it's not." Marco appeared in the doorway. He had his phone in his hand, in the particular expression of a man who has just confirmed something he has been hoping was wrong for the last 40 minutes. "Boss," he said, "I need you to look at something." He set the phone on the counter. On the screen, a security feed from the parking garage. Timestamp. Grainy resolution. But clear enough. A black Escalade on level 2, parked at 11:02, sitting there for 22 minutes. And then at 11:24, exactly 11 minutes before the first shooter moved into position, pulling out and leaving. Luca looked at the license plate on the screen. He already knew what it said. He looked anyway because he was the kind of man who needed to see a thing with his own eyes before he allowed himself to believe it. He looked for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside the city moved through its indifferent night. "That's Dante's car," he said. He said it the way you say the name of a diagnosis you've been dreading, flat and final and carrying the weight of everything it means. Parked there 40 minutes before the ambush, Marco said, and gone before it started. Clean, deliberate. Nobody spoke. Scarlett watched Luca's face. She watched the control he was applying to it, the careful, practiced work of a man who has spent decades not showing people what he was feeling, now doing that work for himself. Not for the room, for himself. She understood that. She had done that work. She knew the cost of it. He knew the safe house address, she said softly, and now he knows you knew the meeting location. If he set this up, Luca, she waited until he looked at her, until his eyes actually found hers. He's expecting you to run somewhere predictable. He's expecting you to reach out to your people. He's counting on you doing exactly what you would normally do in a crisis. Then I don't do that, Luca said. Then you don't do that. He was silent for another moment. Then he turned to Marco with the composure of a man who has swallowed something agonizing and decided to function anyway. 3 names, he said. People who answer to me alone. People who have never had a single conversation with Dante that I haven't known about. Give me 3 names and make the calls. Marco's throat moved. That's a short list, boss. I know, Luca said. Make it anyway. Marco left the room. Luca looked at Scarlett. You saved my life tonight, he said. Not a performance, not a transaction. Just a man stating something true. I moved you from one problem to a slightly smaller one, she said. Don't call it saved yet. There's still a lot of night left. He looked at her, really looked at her with the full, undivided attention that was, she was beginning to understand one of the most disarming things about him. The way he looked at a person like they were the only thing worth looking at. You're not a waitress, he said. I work at a restaurant. That's not what I said. She held his gaze and didn't fill the silence, which was itself an answer. Luca nodded slowly. The nod of a man who has decided to accept a thing he cannot force for now because he needs what comes after more than he needs the explanation. I need your help, he said. I can't pay you in the way I'd normally offer because right now I don't know which of my accounts are being watched. I can't promise you safety because, as of tonight, I'm not certain I can promise myself safety. He paused. What I can promise you is that I will remember everything you did tonight. And in my world, that matters more than money. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, tell me everything you know about your brother. And Luca Moretti, a man who had built his entire empire on the principle of never revealing the full hand, took one long breath and started talking. What Luca told her in the next 40 minutes would change everything she thought she understood about why she was in that stairwell tonight. Because Scarlett had told him the truth, she had seen the staged cars, the untouched drinks, the pattern. What she hadn't told him was why she recognized it, or who had taught her what staged violence looked like, or what name was on the file she had been quietly, carefully, invisibly building for the past 11 months. The name on that file was Dante Moretti, and she had been 3 weeks away from closing it. Luca talked for 40 minutes straight, and Scarlett didn't interrupt him once. That alone seemed to unsettle him. She could see it the way he kept pausing, kept waiting for her to jump in with a question or a reaction, or the kind of skeptical pushback that people in his world offered when they wanted to prove they were listening. She didn't give him any of that. She sat across from him at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface and her eyes on his face, and she let him talk, and the more space she gave him, the more he filled it, and the more he filled it, the more she understood. Dante Moretti was 4 years younger than his brother. He had come up in the same world, learned from the same father, sat at the same table. On paper, he was Luca's second, the man who managed the family's legitimate business interests, who handled the lawyers and the city council relationships and the charitable foundations that made the Moretti name sound like something other than what it was. He was charming in the way that certain people are charming in a discipline rather than a personality, deliberately, strategically, with the precision of someone who had studied what warmth looked like and learned to replicate it. He was always better with people than I was, Luca said. He said it without bitterness, which made it worse somehow. I ran things. Dante made people feel good about the things I ran. It worked. For a long time it worked. When did it stop working? Scarlett asked. Luca's jaw moved. My wife died 14 months ago, Elise. He said the name carefully, like handling something that still had edges. After that, things changed. I changed. I started pulling back from certain operations, certain relationships. He looked at his hands. Dante started moving into the space I left. I told myself it was natural, that I was grateful someone was keeping things running while He stopped. While you were grieving, Scarlett said. While I was grieving, he confirmed. He said it like the word cost him something. 8 months ago, I started hearing things, small things. A deal that went through channels I hadn't approved of, a meeting with a man I'd told Dante to cut contact with 2 years ago. Explanations that were smooth enough to believe if you wanted to. He looked up at her. I wanted to. Because he's your brother. Because he's my brother. The room was quiet for a moment. Marco was in the back, making calls in a voice too low to carry. Outside, the city was doing what cities do at 1 a.m, not sleeping exactly, but shifting into a different register. 3 weeks ago, Luca said, one of my people came to me with something, a name, a meeting, a date. He paused. He was dead 48 hours later. Ruled an accident. He said the word accident the way people say it when they mean something else entirely. Scarlett's hands were still flat on the table. She was working very hard to keep them there. What was the name? She asked. Her voice came out exactly the way she needed it to level professional, the tone of someone gathering information. Luca looked at her. Why does that matter to you? Everything matters to me right now, she said. You're telling me your brother has been systematically building something behind your back for at least 8 months. That means he has partners, structure, funding. That doesn't happen without a name at the center of it. Luca studied her face. That slow, complete attention that she was starting to understand was his version of decision-making. He didn't rush judgments, he earned them. Victor Soren, he said. Scarlett didn't move. She was very, very good at not moving when she needed to be. Victor Soren. She knew that name the way a surgeon knows an anatomy diagram, completely precisely with the understanding of exactly what damage each component could cause. Victor Soren was not a Chicago name. He was Eastern European mid-50s, officially a property developer with interests across 6 countries. Unofficially, he was the single most effective money laundering architect in the Western Hemisphere. And he had been a target of federal interest for 11 years without ever once giving anyone a reason to make an arrest stick. She had put his name in her file 4 months ago, right next to Dante Moretti's. You know that name, Luca said. It wasn't a question. He had read something in her stillness, not the fact of the knowledge, but the quality of it, the specific texture of the recognition that is different from surprise. I've heard it, she said. That's not the same as knowing it. Luca, she met his eyes. There are things I'm going to tell you. Tonight is not the right moment for all of them. What I can tell you right now is that Victor Soren is not just a business contact for your brother. He's the infrastructure. Dante isn't trying to take what you built and run it differently. He's trying to dismantle it and rebuild it inside something much larger. She paused. Something you wouldn't recognize as yours at all. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when a truth arrives too large to immediately process. How long have you known this? Luca asked. Long enough, she said. Not long enough. Marco came back into the kitchen. His face had the gray, compressed look of a man who has made difficult phone calls and received difficult information. He set his phone on the table. I got 2, he said. 2 I'd stake my life on. Tony Ferrano and Rosa Cataneo. He looked at Luca. I tried a 3rd, Jimmy Park. You remember Jimmy been with us 6 years and the line went dead after 2 rings. Someone cut it clean. He paused. That means someone is monitoring our network contacts. Active monitoring. Tonight. Which means they expected you to survive, Scarlett said, looking at Luca. The ambush wasn't the end of the plan. It was the beginning. The 3 of them sat with that for exactly 1 second before Luca said, get Tony and Rosa here. Now, nobody else. Done. Marco was already moving. Luca looked at Scarlett. You said you weren't long enough. How long? 11 months, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, something more complicated than anger. 11 months. He repeated it slowly. You've been building a case against my brother for 11 months, and you were working as a waitress at a restaurant he knew I used as a meeting point. He let that sit for a moment. That's not a coincidence. No, she said, where it's not. Who sent you? Say, nobody sent me. She held his gaze with wheat flinching. I came myself. People don't spend 11 months on something that nobody sent them to do, he said. His voice had an edge now not hostile, but very serious. The voice of a man recalibrating in real time. Not without a reason that's personal. She was quiet. Scarlett, whoosh, the man your brother had killed 14 months ago, she said. The one ruled an accident. She stopped, started again more carefully. That wasn't the first time he'd done it. There was a woman, 3 years ago, a federal agent who was getting close to Soren's operation through a back channel nobody was supposed to know about. She looked at him steadily. Her name was Diana Reyes. The name landed in the room like a stone. Reyes, Luca said quietly. My sister, Scarlett said. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Marco, who had stopped in the doorway, slowly turned back around. Luca didn't look away from her face. He was reading it the way he had been reading it since the parking garage, but now with the key, now with the context now, understanding what the steadiness cost her and why the stillness was so complete, and what it meant that she had spent 11 months being a waitress in a restaurant where Dante Moretti's brother ate dinner. You were DEA, Ishi, he said. I was. Were. I left after Diana. She said it flat and final. The official position was that her death was unconnected to any active investigation. A car accident, icy roads, nobody's fault. Something moved behind her eyes, brief and controlled and hot. I knew better. I spent 4 months trying to prove it through official channels. When that stopped working, I stopped using official channels. You went private. I went personal, she corrected. There's a difference. Luca exhaled slowly. Not relief, more like the particular breath a person takes when a complicated picture suddenly comes into focus and they realize they have been looking at it sideways for a long time. You weren't in that stairwell by accident tonight, he said. No. You were watching Dante's people. I was watching a meeting that was supposed to happen in that garage tonight. A meeting between 2 of Dante's lieutenants and a courier from Soren's side. The ambush on you wasn't the only thing happening tonight. It was cover. While everyone was focused on the shooting, a package was supposed to change hands on level 4. She paused. I don't know what was in it, but I know it was significant enough that Dante burned 6 men in a carefully planned hit just to make sure it happened undisturbed. Marco said very quietly, what kind of package? Documents, most likely. Or a drive. Something that formalizes the transfer of operational control. She looked at Luca. When Dante decided tonight was the night to move against you, he didn't just want you dead. He wanted the paperwork done at the same time. Clean succession, immediate transfer. No gap for anyone loyal to you to organize. Luca stood up from the table. He did it slowly, deliberately, and she watched him reassemble himself as he rose. Watched the grief and the shock and the particular anguish of a man whose brother had just tried to have him murdered, fold themselves back behind the composure, behind the control, behind the face that 12 years of running the Moretti family had made into something almost impenetrable. Almost. Did the exchange happen, he asked. I don't know, she said. I left level 4 to get you out. If it happened while we were in the alley. Can you find out? I have a source, one I trust. She picked up her phone from the table, giving me 10 minutes. She stepped away into the back of the apartment, and Luca stood in the kitchen with Marco, and the weight of the last 2 hours pressing down on everything. Boss, Marco said carefully. Don't, Luca said. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. I know what it looks like. I know what it means. He turned to face Marco, and Marco, who had known Luca Moretti for 9 years, who had stood next to him in rooms that most people didn't walk out of, who had seen him cold and furious and calculating, Marco had never seen this particular expression before. It wasn't rage. Rage was too simple. This was the expression of a man who loves someone and has just been handed proof that the love was used against him like a weapon. I just need 10 minutes too. Marco nodded, stepped back, gave him the silence. Luca stood at the kitchen counter and did not move and did not speak, and the thing that had been locked behind his eyes since Marco put that phone on the table, since the license plate, since the timestamp, since the 48-minute margin between his brother's car leaving and the first bullet finding him, that thing stayed locked. He kept it locked. He had been keeping things locked since he was 17 years old, and he knew how. He knew how, and tonight it was costing him more than it ever had. Scarlett came back in 8 minutes, not 10. She stood in the doorway and looked at him, and her expression told him the answer before she spoke. "The exchange happened," she said, 40 minutes ago. "The drive is with Soren's courier. It's already out of the city." Luca turned to face her. "What's on it?" he asked. "Account structures, shell company frameworks, everything needed to formally integrate Moretti family assets into Soren's network." She paused. "And one more thing, a list." She held his gaze. "Every family member, associate, and contact who has remained loyal to you specifically, not the organization. You." Another pause. "It's a targeting document, Luca." The word targeting sat in the air between them. Marco said something under his breath in Italian that was not a prayer. "He's not just trying to take over," Luca said. His voice was absolutely steady. It was the steadiness of someone who has moved beyond the shock and arrived somewhere far colder. "He's trying to make sure there's nothing left that remembers it was mine." "That's what Soren does," Scarlett said quietly. "He doesn't acquire. He erases. He did it to 2 other organizations in the last 6 years. By the time anyone understood what was happening, there was nothing left to save." She looked at him directly. "Your brother didn't partner with Victor Soren to get more power, Luca. He handed him everything, in exchange for what I don't know yet. But the people on that list," she stopped, started again. "They're in danger, real danger, tonight." Luca moved before she finished the sentence. He crossed to the table, picked up Marco's phone, and held it out to him. "Call Tony and Rosa and tell them not to go home. Tell them to go to the secondary point. They'll know what that means, and not to move until I reach them personally." His voice was clipped and exact. "Then I need the car." "Where are we going?" Marco asked, already dialing. "There's a man named Father Benedetto who runs a community center on the north side. He's been laundering charitable donations for the family for 6 years, which means he's on that list, and he's also been sheltering 3 of my people's families for the past month as a personal favor to me." He was already moving toward the door. "He doesn't carry a weapon. He doesn't have security. And right now he's sitting in a building with people who are on a list that Dante Moretti just handed to Victor Soren." Scarlett was already putting on her jacket. Luca stopped. "You don't have to." "Your brother had my sister killed," she said, simply, without drama. "I've been working toward this for 11 months. I'm not staying in an apartment while it moves." He looked at her for 1 second. Then he nodded and moved. They went down the stairs at a pace that made Luca's wound pull hard at every step. He didn't slow down. In the lobby, Marco's phone buzzed. Tony confirming, Rosa confirming, both in motion. Luca read the messages and felt something that was not quite relief, but was adjacent to it. 2 people he trusted were still alive, still reachable, still his. For now. They hit the street, and Marco had the car, a different one, clean, untraceable, running at the curb. And as Luca pulled open the door, he felt Scarlett's hand on his arm. Brief, firm. "There's something else," she said. "My source told me something when I called, something I didn't say in front of Marco yet." She kept her voice low. "The list that went out on that drive, Dante didn't compile it alone. He needed access to your personal records, communication logs, family contacts that weren't in any official structure." She looked at him steadily. "Someone very close to you gave him that access, recently, in the last 72 hours. Luca went very still. "How close?" he asked. "Close enough that you would have trusted them without thinking about it," she said. "I don't have a name. I have a window, 72 hours. He looked at Marco, who was behind the wheel and couldn't hear them. Then he looked back at her. "Get in the car," he said. His voice was absolutely calm. The calm of a man who has just added a new dimension to an already unbearable problem and decided to carry it anyway. "We'll handle one thing at a time." She got in. The car pulled out into the Chicago night, and Luca sat in the back seat with a bullet wound that needed a real doctor, and a brother who had tried to have him killed, and a woman he had known for less than 2 hours, who might be the only person in this city he could be certain wasn't lying to him. He looked out the window at the passing streets and thought about Dante. About the way Dante had called him 2 days ago, just to check in, just to talk, he'd said the way he sometimes did, easy and warm. the way only a brother can be easy and warm, the particular intimacy of someone who has known you your whole life. Luca had been grateful for the call. He had been grateful. He closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then he opened them, and the city kept moving. And somewhere on the north side, a priest who didn't know he was on a list was going about his evening in complete ignorance of what was coming. They had maybe 20 minutes, maybe less. "Drive faster," Luca said. Marco drove faster, and in the back seat, Scarlett Reyes pulled out her phone and opened the file she had been building for 11 months, and for the first time since she had started it, she was no longer working alone. They made it to the community center with 6 minutes to spare. Luca knew it was 6 minutes because Marco checked his watch the moment they pulled up, and because when they got Father Benedetto out the back door and into the car, they heard the first vehicle turn onto the block. From the south end, headlights off, moving, slow. The particular careful pace of people who were not in a hurry because they believed their target had nowhere to go. Father Benedetto was 63 years old, built like a man who had once been an athlete and had redirected that energy into decades of community work, and he handled being pulled out of his own building at 1:30 in the morning with a composure that told Luca he had been expecting something like this for longer than he'd admitted. "The families," Luca said the moment the car was moving. "The 3 families I asked you to shelter. Where are they now?" "In the back residence," Benedetto said. 6 people total, 2 children. "We need to move them tonight." "I know." The priest looked at Luca's side at the jacket at what was visible beneath it. His expression tightened. "You need a doctor." "I need the families moved first." "Luca." "First," Luca said. "Not hard, just absolute." Benedetto nodded and reached for his phone. Scarlett was in the front seat watching the mirror. "The vehicle behind us turned off," she said. "But there was a second one, 2 blocks north. It's not following its parallel, matching our speed." Marco said nothing, his hands adjusted on the wheel. "They're not trying to stop us," Scarlett said. "They're tracking us. They want to see where we go." "Which means they don't have the full list yet," Luca said. "The drive went to Soren, but Dante's people are still working from incomplete information. They know the names but not the locations." "That buys us maybe 2 hours," she said. "Once Soren's team processes the drive and cross-references it, they'll have everything." 2 hours. Luca ran the math. 6 people in a back residence. 3 families who had trusted him enough to accept his protection and were now in danger precisely because of that trust. A list of loyal contacts somewhere in the city, none of whom knew their names were on it. And somewhere in that same city, his brother was sitting in a room waiting for confirmation that tonight had gone according to plan. "Marco," he said, "the families, can you get them to the Ferraro property in Bridgeport? Tony's already there. I can have him ready to receive." "Do it." He looked at Benedetto. "Tell the families to pack 1 bag. 1. They leave in 20 minutes. Benedetto was already talking into his phone. Scarlett turned from the mirror to look at Luca. In the low light of the moving car, her expression was focused and precise, but there was something else underneath it, something she was working to keep beneath the surface. He had learned in the last 2 hours that when Scarlett Reyes was working to keep something beneath the surface, it was always worth knowing what it was. "Say it," he told her. She glanced at Marco, then back at Luca. "The parallel vehicle," she said quietly. "It's not Dante's style. Dante moves through intermediaries. He keeps distance. He keeps clean. Putting a visible tail on you tonight while everything else is already in motion, that's more aggressive, more direct." She paused. "That's Soren's style." "You're saying Soren already has people on the ground here." "I'm saying Soren may have had people here before tonight, before the ambush, before the drive." She held his gaze. "Which means this was never just Dante's operation." Soren wasn't waiting for the transfer to get involved. He was already involved. Dante didn't hire help. He invited someone into the house. The distinction landed like a cold hand on the back of Luca's neck. "There's a difference," he said slowly, "between a brother who wants to take over and a brother who sold everything to someone who doesn't care about taking over, who only cares about asset extraction." "Yes," Scarlett said, "there is. Dante would know that difference." "Dante would know it," she agreed. "The question is what Soren offered him that made it not matter." Marco's phone buzzed on. He glanced at it and his jaw tightened. "Tony says there's already movement near the Bridgeport property. Someone doing a slow drive-by 20 minutes ago. The list, the drive. They were already working from partial information, and it was already enough. Luca felt the situation compressing around him, the particular sensation of a man who has always operated with space to maneuver, realizing that the space is being taken away deliberately, systematically, by someone who understood exactly how he moved. Someone who had grown up watching how he moved. Change the location, Luca said. Not Bridgeport. Tell Tony the warehouse on Pershing. He'll know it. Nobody outside this car knows about it, except the 3 people I'm going to call personally right now with a number that isn't in any system Dante has touched. Marco nodded and started talking. Scarlett was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You have a burner." "I have 2, Luca said, already reaching for them. Old habit. Good habit." He made 3 calls in 4 minutes. All 3 people answered. All 3 confirmed they were safe, unobserved, able to move. By the 3rd call, something in his chest had loosened fractionally. Not relief, not yet, but the specific sensation of buying time, which in crisis situations was the closest thing to good news available. He hung up and looked at Scarlett. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. "The 72-hour window you mentioned. The person who gave Dante access to my personal records." He paused. 3 days ago, I had a meeting, private, my home office. 3 people in the room, Marco, my attorney, and a woman named Sophia Crane. She manages my personal affairs, scheduling, private correspondence, the things that don't go through the organization's official channels. He watched Scarlett's face. "She has been with me for 4 years. I trust her completely." He paused. "I trusted her completely." "Does she know Dante socially?" "They have met at family events. I never thought," he stopped. "She handled my personal calendar, my private contacts, my home security codes." His voice stayed steady. "If someone gave Dante what he needed in the last 72 hours, and that person had access to everything he would need, it's her." "Where is she now?" "She would have gone home at 6 this evening. She lives alone, North Shore." Scarlett already had her phone out. She typed something, quickly waited. The response came back in under a minute, and she looked at it, and her expression did something small and controlled that told Luca the answer was not good. "Her apartment has been empty since 9 p.m., she said. "My source does a regular check on addresses connected to active cases. Her car is still in the building's garage." She looked up. She didn't drive somewhere. Someone picked her up. "She ran," Marco said from the front. "Or she was collected," Scarlett said. "Carefully, not cruelly. The difference matters." Luca absorbed this without moving his face. Sophia Crane, 4 years. Christmas cards to his late wife's family because he always forgot. Coffee on his desk every morning without being asked because she had noticed in the first week that he didn't function properly without it. The particular trust that accumulates between people who share the ordinary rhythms of daily life without drama or agenda. He thought about how easy he must have been, how readable. How a man who was built to read other people had been read quietly and patiently and completely by someone who knew that the best intelligence is gathered not in dramatic moments, but in the unremarkable ones. "All right," he said, "just that, just the word doing all the work that grief and anger and betrayal would have done if he'd had time for any of them." Marco pulled the car to a stop. They were at a gas station neutral ground, no cameras on this side of the lot, the kind of stop that looked like any other stop. Marco had learned over many years that the best place to have a conversation you didn't want tracked was the most ordinary location available. "We need to make a decision," Marco said, turning in his seat. "We can keep moving, keep protecting people, keep reacting to what Dante throws at us, or we can stop reacting." He looked at Luca. "We know where Dante is. He keeps the apartment on Michigan Avenue, the one he uses for business. He's going to be there tonight waiting for confirmation that you're dead and the drive transfer is complete." A pause. "We could end this tonight." The word "end" sat in the car doing its ugly work. Luca said nothing for a moment. Scarlett said, "If you move on Dante tonight, Soren walks. He's insulated, he has no direct fingerprints on anything that happened. Dante takes the weight, Soren cuts the connection, and 6 months from now he finds another family, another organization, another brother who wants something badly enough to sell everything else to get it." She looked at Luca steadily. Dante is not the problem. Dante is the symptom. She's right, Luca said. He looked at Marco. We need the drive. Marco stared at him. The drive is out of the city. You said it left with Soren's courier. What's the courier's route? I don't know the courier's. I do, Scarlett said. Both men looked at her. She held up her phone. On the screen was a document, dense organized, the product of careful long-term work. Soren uses 3 couriers for sensitive transfers in the Midwest. I've mapped their routes, their vehicles, their timing patterns over the last 9 months. If the transfer happened at the time, I think it did, and they're using the route they used the last 3 times. She zoomed in on something. The courier is on I-90 heading east. He's going to stop. He always stops. There's a truck stop in Indiana mile marker 63 that Soren's people use as a rest point on overnight runs. It's in the file. The silence in the car was absolute. Marco turned fully in his seat to look at her. He had been doing this recalibration in stages all evening, each time arriving at a new understanding of who she was, and each time revising upward, and this was the most significant revision yet. He looked like a man who had started the night thinking he understood the situation, and was now genuinely uncertain about what category any of this fell into. You have 9 months of courier routes, he said. I have 11 months of everything, she said. I've been building this case since 3 months after Diana died. She stopped. I didn't have enough yet. I needed one more connection, one more documented link between Dante and Soren that would hold up to scrutiny. She looked at Luca. Tonight gave me more than I was going to get in 3 more weeks of watching from a stairwell. The drive, Luca said. If we get the drive, Soren's financial infrastructure, the shell company frameworks, the account structures. Is that enough? If it contains what my source says it contains, it's enough to put Soren away for 20 years and take apart everything he's built in the last decade. She paused. And it's enough to show exactly what Dante agreed to, in writing. In exchange for what, Marco said. You said Dante sold everything. What did Soren give him? Scarlett looked at Luca when she answered, not at Marco. Immunity, she said, from you. The word immunity in this context meant something very specific in this world, and everyone in the car understood it immediately. It didn't mean legal protection. It meant Soren had promised Dante that when the restructuring was complete, when the Moretti assets had been fully absorbed, and the organization rebranded under Soren's network, Dante would be protected from any retaliation, from any surviving member of his family who might want to answer what he had done. From Luca. Dante hadn't sold his brother's empire for money or for power or for ambition. He had sold it because he was afraid of what Luca would eventually do when he found out what Dante had been building. He had sold it as a preemptive move, as protection. Luca sat in the backseat of a gas station parking lot with a bullet wound and the knowledge that his brother had tried to have him murdered not out of greed but out of fear, and somehow that was worse. Somehow that landed in a completely different part of him, not the cold operational center that was managing tonight's decisions, but somewhere older and more personal, the part of him that remembered growing up with Dante, that remembered teaching him to drive, that had stood next to him at their father's funeral and held his arm when his knees went. Dante had been afraid of him for long enough to plan this, for long enough to make this deal. How long has he been afraid of me? Luca asked. He didn't address it to anyone specifically. Maybe to himself. Scarlett answered anyway, quietly. Long enough that when Soren approached him, the offer made sense. Soren approached Dante. 8 months ago, according to what I could reconstruct. She paused. Dante didn't go looking for this, but when it came, he said yes faster than a man should say yes to something like this. She held his gaze. I think he had already been thinking about it for a while. Marco said, Ice 90 mile marker 63. How much time do we have? Scarlett checked her calculation. If we leave right now, 90 minutes, maybe less. Marco looked at Luca. The families are safe, Luca asked. Moving to Pershing now, Tony's people are already there. Father Benedetto? With Tony. Rosa. Confirmed at secondary point. Secure. Luca reached for his seatbelt. Then we drive. Marco turned the key. You will want to tell me what the plan is when we get there? The plan, Luca said. is to get the drive without anyone knowing we took it. Clean, no gunfire, no incident, nothing that tells Soren or Dante that we intercepted it tonight. He looked at Scarlett. You know the courier's usual vehicle. Blue Kenworth Semi with Ohio plates ending in 447. The sensitive package won't be in the cab. Soren's couriers carry it integrated into the truck's structure. I know where. Marco glanced at her in the mirror. You know where they hide it in the truck. I spent 6 weeks at that truck stop, she said simply. You learn things. Marco made a sound that was almost admiration, but not quite, because he was still in the stage of managing his ego alongside his respect, and they would need another hour or so before the respect fully won. They drove. On I-90 heading east, Luca sat in the dark and thought about the drive, about what was on it, about the account structures and the shell companies, and the 17 years of work he had poured into building something that his brother had decided to hand to a stranger. He thought about Elise, who had died 14 months ago, and had never liked. Dante had said once in a quiet voice that Dante smiled at people the way someone reads a script and not the way someone feels a feeling. He had defended Dante. He had told her she was wrong. He thought about how much easier the last 14 months would have been if he'd been wrong about that. When we get the drive, he said, it goes to your people, Federal. To someone I trust at federal level, Scarlett said. One person. Not a field office, not a task force, one person who has been waiting for something solid on Soren for 4 years, and who will know exactly what to do with it and how to do it quietly. And Dante, she was quiet for a moment. That's your decision, not mine. Tell me what you think. I think, she said carefully, that Soren is the target. Dante is the witness, a very well-motivated witness, who, when he understands that the deal he made is no longer going to protect him, that Soren is going down and taking everything connected to him, will have a very strong reason to cooperate. She paused. Scared men cooperate, Luca, especially when the alternative is losing the protection they traded everything for. He looked out at the highway moving beneath them, dark and fast and indifferent. You want to use Dante to finish Soren, he said. I want to use the truth to finish Soren, she said. Dante is part of the truth. The car was quiet for a while. The road signs passed overhead distances to places none of them were going. Marco drove at exactly 4 miles over the speed limit, which was fast enough to cover ground and slow enough to be invisible. At mile marker 41, Scarlett's phone buzzed. She looked at it, and her face changed, the smallest, most controlled change, the kind that Luca had learned to watch for because it always meant something significant. What? He said. She looked up from the phone, and for the first time since he had met her in that parking garage stairwell, she looked uncertain. Not afraid uncertain, as if the information on the screen had introduced a variable she hadn't built into any of her 11 months of careful calculation. My source, she said. Someone ran a check on me tonight, through federal systems. She paused. The search originated from inside the Chicago field office. Another pause. At 10:47 p.m., 40 minutes before the ambush. Nobody spoke. Someone in the federal system knew tonight was happening, Marco said slowly. Someone in the federal system ran my name, Scarlett said, which means someone knew I was connected to this, which means, she stopped, which means your 11 months of working alone may not have been as alone as you thought, Luca said. The sentence sat in the moving car like a live thing. Scarlett stared at her phone. The file she had built, the careful, solitary, deeply personal construction of 11 months of grief turned into purpose, stared back at her. Someone had been watching her build it, and tonight they had checked to see if she was still in play. Who is your contact? Luca asked, quietly, without pressure, but seriously. The one person you trust at federal level. She looked at him, her mouth opened, and then Marco hit the brakes hard. Something large and dark swung across the highway 30 meters ahead of them, and Luca saw it in the same instant. A truck jackknifed across 2 lanes, stopped. Cold, no lights, no flares, positioned it with a geometric precision that had nothing to do with an accident. That's the courier's truck, Scarlett said. Her voice had gone to flat and operational. That's the Kenworth. Someone got there first, Marco said. The 3 of them sat in the car on a dark Indiana highway, looking at a jackknife semi with no emergency lights and no driver visible, and the package that could end Victor Soren somewhere inside its structure. Luca looked at Scarlett. Is it Soren's people? He said. Could they be retrieving it? Soren wouldn't jackknife his own courier's truck, she said. That's not retrieval. That's interception. She was already reaching for the door handle. Someone else is here for the drive. Who? Marco said. She looked at Luca one more time, and in her eyes he saw it, the recalibration, the rapid reassessment, the look of someone who has had the ground shifted beneath careful and deliberate feet and is deciding in real time whether to move forward or pull back. She chose forward. I don't know yet, she said, but I'm going to mind to find out. She opened the door and stepped into the cold Indiana night, and Luca was out a half second behind her because whatever was happening on that highway, whatever new dimension of this night had just announced itself in the form of a jackknife truck on a dark stretch of I-90, there was not a version of the next 5 minutes where he was going to let her walk into it alone. The truck driver was zip-tied to his own steering wheel and alive, which was the first piece of information Scarlett pulled from the situation in the 12 seconds it took her to get to the cab door and yank it open. He was mid-50s, heavy-set, with a particular glazed expression of someone who had been hit hard enough to see stars and was still working through the aftermath. Not unconscious, not dead, contained. Professional work. How many? She said. He blinked at her. Two men. They came out of nowhere. Black SUV, no plates. Which direction did they go? He jerked his head toward the tree line on the south shoulder. Scarlett was already moving before he finished. Luca caught her arm. Not hard, just enough. You don't know who they are. I know what they came for, she said. And if they get back to a vehicle with that drive before we do this entire night, means nothing. She looked at his hand on her arm. I know what I'm doing. I know you do, he said. That's not my point, Doctor. Marco appeared at Luca's shoulder. He had the look of a man who had accepted the situation and was now just trying to manage its variables. South shoulder, I go first. Nobody goes alone, Scarlett said. She looked at Luca's side, at the wound she had stitched 3 hours ago in a safe house kitchen, which had now been through a car ride and a parking lot and a highway stop, and was silently registering its objections. You stay visible. If this goes wrong, someone needs to be standing when it's over. I don't stay behind while... It's not behind, she said. It's command position. You're the one who knows who to call when we have the drive. You're the one who knows which 3 people to trust tonight. Without you, we have a drive and no structure to use it. She held his gaze for one firm second. Stay visible. He let go of her arm. She and Marco moved toward the tree line. Luca stood next to a jackknife truck on a dark Indiana highway and did the hardest thing he had done all night, which was stand still. He used the time. He pulled the second burner from his jacket and made a call to Tony Ferrano. Families confirmed safe at the Pershing location, nobody following, children settled. He made a second call to Rosa Cataneo, who answered on the first ring, and whose voice had the precise, ready quality of someone who had been sitting upright in a chair for the last 2 hours waiting. He told her what he needed her to do. When the drive arrived, gave her the name of Scarlett's federal contact, the one name Scarlett had given him in the car before the truck appeared, and Rosa said nothing for 3 seconds and then said, I know that name. That's a good name. I know, Luca said. Are you okay? The question landed with the specific weight of sincerity. Rosa Cataneo had been with the family for 7 years, and she asked it the way a person who genuinely cared asked it, not performing, concerned, not checking a box. I'm operational, he said. That's not what I asked. He watched the dark tree line where Scarlett and Marco had disappeared and said, Later, Rosa, I'll be okay later. He hung up and stood in the cold and waited, which was its own form of discipline. He heard them before he saw them, voices, then movement, then Marco emerging from the south shoulder with someone in front of him, one arm pinned behind his back, moving with the resigned posture of a man who had made a calculation and lost it. Then Scarlett 3 steps behind with a second man whose hands were laced behind his head and whose expression was the particular blank that trained people wear when they're deciding whether the situation is recoverable. Luca looked at the 2 men. Neither of them were Soren's people. He knew Soren's people. He had spent years developing a sense of the Eastern European operators who moved through Chicago's underworld, their specific body language, the particular way they held themselves in relation to authority. These men were not that. These men were American. Federal adjacent. The shoes, the haircuts, the way they stood, specifically the way the second one was already assessing exits even with his hands behind his head. You didn't learn to assess exits like that on a street crew. Who are you, Yang? Luca asked. The first man said nothing. The second man, the one Scarlett, had looked directly at Luca and said, "We're on the same side." "That's what people say when they want me not to ask the question again," Luca said. "Answer it properly." Scarlett stepped around the second man and faced him directly. She looked at his face for a long moment in the way that she sometimes looked at things carefully, completely pulling information from what was there rather than what was being offered. And then something happened in her expression that Luca had not seen before. A specific recognition, not the clean, controlled recognition of a professional encountering expected information. The messy, unprepared kind. "Hendricks," she said. The second man exhaled. Or Scarlett. The name in his mouth, her name said, with the particular familiarity of someone who had used it many times before in different circumstances, made Luca look between the two of them with the attention of a man recalibrating. "You know each other," he said. "He was my supervisor," Scarlett said, "at DEA." She had not broken eye contact with Hendricks. Her voice was level the way a very taut wire is level, technically correct under significant strain. "For 6 years. Until she resigned," Hendricks said. "Until I was pushed out," she corrected. The two words landed with a precision that suggested they had been carried for a long time, polished into something exact. "After Diana." "Scarlett, don't." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You told me Diana's death wasn't connected to the Soren case. You personally told me that. You sat across from me in that office and said the words." "I know what I said." "Were you lying?" The pause before his answer lasted exactly long enough to be its own answer. "It was complicated," Hendricks said. Marco made a sound somewhere between a word and a judgment. Luca watched Scarlett take the information, watched her absorb it with the same controlled compression she had applied to every difficult thing tonight, watched her decide in real time how much of what she was feeling to allow into her body and how much to redirect into the next decision. She was remarkable at this. He had never met anyone who was so disciplined about grief, and he recognized it because it was the same discipline he used, and he knew exactly how exhausting it was and how much it cost. "Why are you here?" she said. "Tonight specifically on this highway." "Same reason you are," Hendricks said. "The drive. You have a team, 2 vehicles on the parallel service road. I have 6 agents." He glanced at Luca with the careful measuring expression of someone who has spent a career reading threat levels. "This wasn't the operation we expected tonight." "What operation did you expect?" "We had intelligence that the transfer was happening tonight. We've been tracking Soren's couriers for 3 months. He paused. "We didn't know about the ambush on Mr. Moretti. We didn't know you were involved." He looked at Scarlett directly. "I didn't know you were in play." "Because I never told you," she said. "Because you told me the case was closed." "I told you the official case was closed." "Is there a difference?" He looked at her steadily. "There is when I kept working it unofficially for 14 months because I knew you were right and I couldn't prove it, and the people above me didn't want to hear it." He said it flatly, without drama. The way someone says something they have been holding for a long time and have decided tonight that the holding is done. "I've been running a parallel investigation on my own clock, my own dime, and one analyst I trust with my life. 6 weeks ago, we got close enough that I requested the courier intercept. I couldn't tell anyone on my team why officially the Soren case has been at a dead stop for 2 years. The tree line was quiet. On the highway, the jackknife truck sat in its pool of stillness. The driver was still in the cab. Luca could see the shape of him through the windshield, not moving smart enough to understand that the situation around him required him to be exactly nowhere. "The search," Scarlett said. "Someone ran my name through federal systems tonight. At 10:47. Hendricks looked at her. "That was me." "Why, huh?" "Because I got a report that there had been an incident at a parking garage on West Monroe, and a woman matching your description had been observed leaving the scene with an injured individual." He paused. "I was checking to make sure you were still operational." "You were checking to make sure I was still alive," she said. He didn't deny it. Luca looked at the two of them at the specific complicated texture of a relationship between people who had worked closely together, who had trusted each other, who had gone through something terrible and come out of it on different sides of a decision, and who were now standing in a cold Indiana night, trying to figure out whether they were still on the same side of anything. He understood this dynamic. He had lived versions of it for the last 8 months with his brother. "The drive," Luca said. He didn't say it loudly. He said it the way you redirect a meeting that is about to become a different kind of conversation than the one you need. "You came to intercept it. We came to intercept it. The driver's alive, which means whoever was supposed to receive it at the other end is going to know within..." He glanced at his watch. 2 hours that it never arrived. "We don't have time for history." Hendricks looked at him for a long moment. The measured professional look of a federal agent assessing a man who was on a very long list of people the federal government had complicated feelings about. "You're Luca Moretti," he said. "Yes. The man I've spent the better part of a decade building a case against." "Presumably," Luca said. "And tonight my brother tried to have me killed in order to hand my organization to Victor Sorin, which I imagine complicates your decade of work considerably." He held the agent's gaze. "The drive has everything. Soren's financial infrastructure, the transfer documents, the account structures. If what Scarlett believes is on it is actually on it, you have everything you need to close your case and several others." He paused. "Where is it?" Hendricks was quiet for one more moment. Then he looked at the first man, the one Marco still had, and said, "Show him." The first man reached slowly into his jacket and produced a sealed evidence bag. Inside it, a drive. Small, ordinary looking. The kind of object that was completely unremarkable and contained presumably the financial architecture of a decade of criminal enterprise. Luca looked at it. He had spent 17 years building something. His father's foundation expanded and complicated and made into a machine. And on that drive was everything Dante had done to dismantle it, every signature, every transaction, every carefully documented transfer of loyalty and asset and future. He had expected to feel rage when the moment arrived. He had been managing rage for the last 3 hours. But standing in front of that evidence bag on a dark Indiana highway, what he felt was quieter than rage. Older. The specific exhaustion of a man who has been right about the wrong things for too long. "What happens now?" Marco said. He addressed it to Luca, but he was looking at Hendricks. "Now," Hendricks said, "I take the drive, I process it through my analysts, and I build the arrest package for Soren within 48 hours. With what's on this, I can have federal warrants by tomorrow morning." He looked at Scarlett. "And I need everything you've built in 11 months, the full file." "You'll get it," Scarlett said, "in one condition." "Scarlett, one condition," she said again. "Diana, her death goes into the official record, connected to the Soren investigation, connected to Dante Moretti. It stops being an accident." Her voice was completely steady. She had been building to this for 11 months, and she delivered it with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were asking and was not prepared to accept anything less. She was working a case. She was killed for it. That gets documented. Hendricks looked at her for a long time. "Yes," he said. The word was simple. It was everything. Scarlett nodded once, reached into her jacket, pulled out a flash drive of her own slim, worn at the edges from months of handling, and held it out. Hendricks took it, and in that exchange, in that small and undramatic handoff on a cold highway shoulder, 11 months of solitary grief and careful work completed the journey from personal mission to official record. Diana Reyes, who had been ruled an accident, who had been filed and closed and moved past, became evidence, became truth, became something that could not be undone or reclassified or quietly buried again. Luca watched Scarlett's face in the moment after she let go of the drive. He watched her exhale, just once, just barely. The smallest possible release of something that had been held too long, and even then she pulled it back almost immediately because there was still work to do, and she was still the kind of person who finished things. But he saw it. He saw it, and he filed it in a place that had nothing to do with operations. Hendricks was already on his phone calling his team in from the parallel road. 2 vehicles arrived within 4 minutes in the quiet efficiency with which the federal team processed the scene, The driver, the truck, the evidence bag, the documentation told Luca that Hendricks had been preparing for this moment for a long time and had not wasted the preparation. Marco stood next to Luca and watched and said in a low voice, "Are we giving information to federal agents voluntarily? We're ensuring that a man who tried to have me murdered tonight is prosecuted along with the man he sold my organization to," Luca said equally low. "How that information reaches the right people is a logistical detail." Marco considered this. "Your father would have something to say about that." "My father," Luca said, "is not here." He paused, and he made his own compromises. "I know what they were." Marco was quiet. One of Hendricks' agents approached and spoke to Hendricks briefly, too low to hear, and Hendricks' expression shifted, not dramatically, but the kind of shift that happened when new information arrived that changed the shape of the next hour. He walked back to where Luca and Scarlett were standing. "There's a problem," he said. "Tell me," Scarlett said. "The drive. My analyst just did a preliminary access check remotely. I had her on standby." He paused. "It's encrypted, layered encryption, military grade. We can break it, but it's going to take longer than 48 hours. Significantly longer." He looked at both of them. "Without the decryption key, the warrant package is circumstantial. It buys us time, it puts pressure on Soren, but it doesn't close anything." "Who has the key?" Marco said. Hendricks looked at Luca. Luca understood what the look meant before the words came. "The key was sent separately," Hendricks said. "Standard protocol for Soren's operations, never send the package and the key through the same channel. The key went to the person who authorized the transfer." He paused. "The person who initiated the transaction on Soren's end." "Victor Soren," Luca said. "Or the person acting as his representative in Chicago," Hendricks said. "The person who was present at the transfer authorization. Who physically signed off on it." Everyone was quiet. Scarlett said it first because she had already worked it through. "Dante," she said. "Dante has the key." The name came back into the night like something that had never really left, like it had been circling the entire time, patient and inevitable, waiting for the moment when there was no longer any path forward that didn't go directly through it. Luca had been moving all night. He had been moving since the parking garage, since the first bullet, since the moment his body had registered the impact and his mind had registered his brother's name. He had been moving through safe houses and car rides and Indiana highways and federal agents and evidence bags, and he had been managing the movement of grief and fury and the specific devastation of betrayal by staying in motion, because motion was the discipline and the discipline was the survival. Now he was still, and he was thinking about Dante, about where Dante was right now in the Michigan Avenue apartment, most likely waiting for confirmation that was not going to come the way he expected, about what Dante's face would look like when the door opened and it was not the confirmation he was waiting for, about what Luca was going to say, about whether there was anything to say at all. "I'll get the key," he said. Hendricks stared at him. "Mr. Moretti." "My brother has a decryption key that you need to prosecute Victor Soren," Luca said. "I'm going to go get it." He looked at Hendricks with an evenness that was not hostility, but was also not negotiable. "Not for you, not for your case, because Soren used my family's name to build something that never should have existed, and because the man who let him do it is my brother, and because there are things between a man and his brother that don't get resolved by evidence bags and warrant packages." He paused. "I'm going to go see Dante, and when I come back, you'll have your key." "And if Dante doesn't give it to you," Hendricks said. Luca looked at him. "He'll give it to me," he said, "because when I walk through that door, Dante is going to understand two things simultaneously. First, that Victor Soren is already finished, that the drive is in federal hands, and the deal he made is already collapsing. And second," he stopped. "Let the pause do its work. Second, that I'm still alive, that I walked out of that parking garage and I've been moving all night and I am standing in front of him, and everything he was afraid of, everything that made him say yes to Soren in the first place, is in the room." The highway was quiet. Scarlett was watching him, not with analysis this time, with something more direct than that. The specific attention of a person watching another person make a decision that is going to cost them something real and respecting the cost. I'm coming with you, she said. Dante had my sister killed, she said, simply, for the second time tonight, without drama, without performance. Just the fact placed where it needed to be. I have been working toward this moment for 11 months. I am not waiting in an Indiana truck stop while it happens. He looked at her. He thought about saying no. He went through the logic of it, the reasons it would be cleaner, safer, more controlled to handle Dante alone. He went through the logic and found it sound, and then he looked at her face and understood that sound logic was not the relevant measure here. All right, he said. He looked at Marco. Stay here. Work with Hendrix. Keep Rosa and Tony in their positions until you hear from me personally. Marco's expression conveyed several things simultaneously: concern, disagreement, professional resignation, and the particular loyalty of a man who had been with someone long enough to know when arguing was finished. Call me the second you're in that apartment. I will. Luca turned to Hendrix. We need a vehicle. Hendrix looked at him for one long moment, the look of a federal agent making a decision that was going to require some creative reporting later, and then turned to one of his team members and said, give them the keys to the secondary. The agent looked at his supervisor with the expression of someone whose training had not prepared him for this exact scenario. Now, Hendrix said. They got the keys. Luca and Scarlett walked to the vehicle, a dark sedan, unremarkable clean, and as Scarlett reached for the passenger door, she paused, turned back to look at Hendrix, who was standing where they'd left him, watching them go. Richard, she said. It was the first time she had used his first name. He looked up at the sound of it. When this is over, when the file is closed and the record is corrected, and Diana's name is what it should be. She paused. We're going to have a conversation about the 2 years you could have told me you were still working it. Hendrix nodded. I know. I'm not going to enjoy that conversation. I know that too. She got in the car. Luca drove. He drove with the focused quietness of a man who has made a decision and is moving toward it and does not need to talk about the decision. And Scarlett sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap, and the same quality of quiet, and between them, the silence had the particular texture of two people who understood each other well enough not to fill space that didn't need filling. 20 minutes outside Chicago, Scarlett said, how are you going to do it? Luca kept his eyes on the road. Honestly. Tell me what that means. He thought about it for a moment. I'm going to tell him that the drive is gone, that Soren is finished, that the immunity deal he was promised is already worthless. He paused. And then I'm going to tell him that I know why he did it, not the business reasons. The real reason. He paused longer this time. And I'm going to ask him if there is any version of the rest of our lives where he is honest with me about that. Face to face. Tonight. Scarlett was quiet. That's not what I expected you to say, she said. What did you expect? Something harder, she said. This is the hardest thing I've done all night, he said. And he said it so plainly, so without performance or self-pity, that she believed him immediately. The Chicago skyline began to assemble itself in the distance lights against the dark familiar and indifferent and inexhaustible. Scarlett looked at it and thought about Diana. About the version of this night she had imagined for 11 months, the moment of closure, the moment the file closed, the moment the account was settled. She had imagined it as something clean, as something that would feel finished. She was beginning to understand that the things that mattered most never finished cleanly. They finished with you still standing, still breathing, still carrying the weight of them, but carrying it differently. Carrying it with the knowledge that you had gone all the way to the end of what you could do and done it. That would have to be enough. Maybe it was. Michigan Avenue, she said. Michigan Avenue, he confirmed. They drove into the city, and somewhere in a building on Michigan Avenue, Dante Moretti was waiting for news that his brother was dead, and instead, his brother was coming home. Dante Moretti opened the door himself, which meant he had sent his people away, which meant he had been expecting a different kind of visitor tonight and had not wanted witnesses. What he had not been expecting was his brother. The moment stretched between them, 2 seconds, maybe 3, and in those seconds, Luca watched every calculation his brother had ever made run across his face at once. The shock, the rapid reassessment, the specific, terrible recognition of a man who has built an entire architecture around one assumption and just watched that assumption walk through the door, alive and upset and looking directly at him. Dante took a step back. Luca walked in. Scarlett came in behind him and pulled the door closed, and Dante's eyes went to her with a flash of confusion that lasted exactly as long as it took him to understand she was not incidental. She was not a witness or a coincidence. She was here with intent, which meant Luca had not come alone, which meant this was not a conversation Luca was uncertain about. Luca! Dante's voice came out thinner than he intended. She could hear him trying to find the register he wanted and missing it. I heard there was someone told me there was an incident tonight. At the garage. I've been trying to reach you for hours. Don't, Luca said, just that word, quiet and final as a door closing. Dante stopped. The two brothers stood in the living room of the Michigan Avenue apartment, and the silence between them had the particular weight of shared history of two people who had known each other their entire lives, suddenly on opposite sides of something that could not be walked back. Luca's face was the face he used when he had already finished feeling something and had moved into the space on the other side of it. Dante's face was the face of a man who had been waiting all night for specific news and had just received information that completely restructured the next several hours of his life. The drive is gone, Luca said. Federal custody. Tonight. The courier on I-90, the package never arrived where it was supposed to. He watched his brother process this and did not help him process it. Soren's network is going to be taken apart in the next 48 hours. The account structures, the shell companies, the transfer documents, everything that was on that drive. He paused. Everything you signed, Dante sat down. He didn't choose to sit, his legs made the decision for him. The immunity agreement, Luca said. The protection Soren promised you. You understand what it's worth now. Dante looked at the floor. Look at me, Luca said. Dante looked up, and she saw it then, what was underneath the calculation and the fear and the months of careful planning. Something much older and much simpler. The face of a younger brother who had done something irreversible and was sitting in the first moment of understanding exactly how irreversible it was. Why, Luca said. The word carried everything, not just the ambush, not just the drive, not just Soren, all of it. The 8 months of quiet repositioning, the access granted to Sophia Crane, the black Escalade in the parking garage, the 6 men with loaded weapons, and a plan built around the assumption that Luca Moretti would not walk out of that garage. I need you to tell me why. Dante's jaw worked. You wouldn't understand. Try me. You never, he stopped, started again with the strained effort of someone who has rehearsed a conversation they expected to have under different circumstances and is now attempting to run it in real time without preparation. You were always the one, Father's chosen one, the one who ran things, who made decisions, who everyone looked at when they walked into a room. I spent 20 years being the other one, the one who handled the parts that didn't matter, the parts that made your parts look clean. I asked you to manage the legitimate side because you were good at it, Luca said, because I trusted you with it. You trusted me with it because it kept me useful without giving me anything real, Dante said. And there was something genuine in it, something that had been compressed for a long time and was coming out now without the polish of planning. You controlled everything, Luca. Every decision, every direction. Even after Elise died, even when you pulled back, you were still the center. Everything still moved around you. I was never, he stopped. Say it, Luca said, quietly. I was never going to be more than your shadow, Dante said, and I was tired. The room was quiet. Scarlett stood near the door and did not move, and understood that this part of the night did not belong to her. She was witness, not participant. She had spent 11 months working toward this moment, and now that it was here, she understood it was not her moment. It was theirs. These 2 men and 37 years of shared blood and the vast uncrossable distance that had opened between them over the course of one night. When Soren came to you, Luca said, what did he offer? A seat, Dante said. Not a shadow seat, not a ceremonial position, a real one, in a real structure, something that was mine. He looked at his hands. He told me that in his network, what I could do, the relationships, the political connections, the legitimate framework was worth more than what you'd ever made it worth. So you sold my organization to a man who intended to erase it, Luca said, to get a promotion. It was exactly like that, Luca said. Not with heat, with a precision that was worse than heat. And you knew, Dante, you knew what Soren does with the organizations he acquires. You know what happened in Detroit. You know what happened in Miami. There was nothing left. The people, the families, the contacts erased. And you handed him a list. Dante flinched. The targeting document, Luca said. The list of every person loyal to me. You compiled that. Soren required it as part of... You compiled it, Luca said again. People I've known for 20 years. Father Benedetto, Tony Ferrano, their families. His voice remained steady, and the steadiness was the most terrifying thing in the room. Did you think about what happened to them when you were building your seat at Soren's table? Did you think about what happened to the people on that list? Dante said nothing. Look at me, Luca said for the second time. Dante looked. Did you think about what happened to them? A long pause, long enough that its own answer was the answer. No, Dante said, barely audible. I didn't. The admission cost him something visible. She could see it take something out of him. Not guilt performing itself for an audience, but the specific internal collapse of a man who has said a true thing that he cannot take back, and who is now in the first minutes of having to live with it. Luca breathed, in and out, one breath deliberate. Sophia Crane, he said. Was she willing? Dante looked up sharply. Did she choose to help you, Luca said? Or did you use something against her? The pause was shorter this time. I didn't force her. She had a situation. Financial. I helped her with it a year ago, and when I needed access to your personal files, he stopped. She didn't know what it was for. She knew enough, Scarlett said from the door, her first words since they had entered the apartment. Dante looked at her. She knew enough to disappear before tonight was over. Whatever you told her, she understood the implication. Dante looked at Luca. Who is she? Someone who was 3 weeks away from having enough evidence to close a federal case against you and Victor Soren, Luca said. Without the ambush tonight, without the drive, on her own. He paused. Her sister was Diana Reyes. The name hit Dante like something physical. She watched it land and watched what happened in his face, the recognition, the sequence of realizations, the specific expression of a man who has just understood that the woman standing 10 feet away from him has known exactly who he was for 11 months and has been waiting. He looked at Scarlett. She looked back at him. She had thought about this moment. She had thought about it on long nights in a restaurant apron, refilling drinks and watching the door building her file one documented entry at a time. She had imagined what she would feel. She had prepared for anger, for the specific hot surge of confrontation with the person responsible for the worst thing that had ever happened to her. What she felt instead was something quieter and more final. Not satisfaction. Satisfaction was too light, more like the closing of a very long and very heavy chapter. The specific sensation of arriving somewhere you have been walking toward for such a long time that the arrival itself is almost secondary to the fact of having made it. My sister was working a case, she said. Her voice was completely even. She was 29 years old, and she was good at her job, and she was getting close enough that someone decided to stop her, that someone was connected to you. She held his gaze. I need you to say it, not for me, for the record, for the file that is going to the federal agent waiting outside the city for what I bring him. Dante looked at her for a long moment. I didn't order it, he said. But you knew, she said. Another pause. She waited. She had learned in 11 months how to wait. I knew, Dante said, after. Soren told me after. He told me there had been a complication and it had been handled, and I didn't ask what the complication was because his voice broke fractionally, recovered. Because I didn't want to know. But you knew, she said, again. Yes, he said, I knew. She nodded once, reached into her jacket and pulled out her phone. She had been recording since they walked through the door, a simple voice memo running quietly because she had not been a DEA agent for 6 years, without understanding that conversations like this one were only useful if they were documented. Dante saw the phone, Barbicino. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who has been outmaneuvered so completely that surprise is no longer a relevant emotion. Is that, he started. Yes, she said. Luca looked at his brother for a long moment, at the man who had grown up next to him, who had shared his childhood and his father and his grief and 37 years of ordinary and extraordinary life, and who had made a sequence of choices that had led them both to this apartment at 2 in the morning with a federal recording running and everything broken between them. "I need the decryption key," Luca said, "for the drive." Dante was quiet. "Dante, if I give you the key, there's nothing left," Dante said. "The deal with Soren collapses. The immunity is gone. He stopped. "There's nothing left." "There wasn't going to be anything left anyway," Luca said, not cruelly, with the flatness of someone delivering a weather report. "Soren doesn't honor immunity agreements with people who fail him. You had 6 men in that garage and I walked out. He's already writing you off." He paused. "The key is your only negotiating position. With the federal agents who are going to be at your door in the next 18 hours, regardless of what you give them tonight." Another pause, and this one was softer, not in tone in what was underneath the tone. "And with me." Dante looked at him. "With you." "You are my brother," Luca said. It was the hardest sentence he had said all night. It cost more than the wound in his side. It cost more than the parking garage and the Indiana highway and the evidence bag and all of it. "That is not a thing I can change by choosing to. I have been trying to change it in my head for the last 6 hours and I cannot do it." He breathed. "I am not going to tell you that what you did is forgivable. I am not going to stand here and pretend that I am not." He stopped. Something moved in his face, brief and real and not for the room. "I am not going to do that. But the key gives you something. The cooperation, the recording, the testimony, it gives you something when you are sitting across from a federal prosecutor and trying to build a future from what is left." He looked at his brother with the direct, unmediated gaze of a man who has decided to tell the full truth and live with whatever comes from it. "It's the only thing I have left to give you, and I'm giving it." The apartment was absolutely silent. Dante put his face in his hands. He sat like that for 20 seconds. Maybe 30. She did not time it. She stood near the door and let it be what it was, which was a man dismantling in real time the version of himself he had been building for 37 years and trying to locate whatever was underneath it. Then he stood up, walked to the desk in the corner of the room, opened the center drawer, removed a small piece of paper, handwritten 8 lines of alphanumeric code, the kind of thing that only existed on paper precisely because paper could not be hacked or intercepted or remotely accessed. He held it out to Luca. Luca took it, held it for a moment, looked at it, then looked at his brother. "When the federal agents come," Luca said, "cooperate fully, answer every question, hold nothing back." He paused. "Can you do that?" "Yes," Dante said. His voice was stripped of everything that was not the word itself. Luca nodded. He turned and walked to the door. He didn't look back. She understood watching him that this was not coldness. It was the specific mercy of a man who understood that his brother needed him to leave the room before either of them said something that made the next version of their lives impossible to reach. She followed him out. In the hallway, Luca stood with the decryption key in his hand and his eyes on the middle distance, and she waited beside him without speaking, because some moments require the person next to you to simply be there and not fill the space with anything. After a moment, he said, "Call Hendricks." She called. Hendricks answered on the first ring. She gave him the key, read it to him, character by character, while he repeated it back, and then said, "You'll have full cooperation from Dante Moretti. Tonight if you move tonight." She paused. "Move tonight, Richard, before he changes his mind." "Already moving," Hendricks said. "Scarlett." A pause. "Good work." She hung up. Luca looked at her. "Is it enough? The key plus the drive, plus a cooperating witness who was present at the transfer authorization?" She held his gaze. "It's enough to put Victor Soren away for the rest of his life. It's enough to dismantle everything he built. It's enough." She paused. "It's enough." He nodded. He looked like a man who has completed something enormous and has not yet found the ground on the other side of it. "Your wound," she said. He looked down at his side, almost surprised, as if his body had been such a secondary concern for the last several hours that it had almost ceased to be relevant information. "I know a doctor," she said. "You know a doctor," he repeated. "I know several things you wouldn't expect me to know," she said. And for the first time since the parking garage stairwell, since the moment she stepped out of the shadows in her restaurant apron and told Marco not to fire his weapon, something crossed her face that was not operational, not controlled, not the carefully maintained steadiness of a woman with a mission and a file and 11 months of disciplined grief. Something lighter than all of that. Something that had almost forgotten how to exist and was cautiously, tentatively locating itself again. Luca looked at her. "Scarlett," he said. "Yes." "When this is over," he stopped. "Try it again. When Soren is arrested and the case is closed and Diana's file says what it should say." He looked at her directly. "What do you do?" She was quiet for a moment. It was a question she had not let herself answer for 11 months, because the answer required the other side of something she could not yet see. "I don't know," she said. It came out simply, honestly, without the usual precision. "I've been moving toward this for so long that I haven't thought much about what's after it." "Then think about it now," he said. "Start thinking about it now." She looked at him, at the face of a man who was also standing on the other side of something enormous, also trying to locate the ground. A man who had lost his wife and almost lost his life and lost in a different way his brother all in the space of 14 months, and who was standing in a hallway at 3 in the morning asking her to think about the future. Not for him. Not as a proposition. As one person saying to another, there is something after this and it is worth thinking about. She found to her own surprise that she believed him. "Let's get you to a doctor first," she said. They went down in the elevator and out into the Chicago night, and the city was doing what it always did, indifferent and vast and ongoing, the kind of place that witnesses everything and remembers nothing and keeps moving regardless. She drove. He sat in the passenger seat with the decryption key still in his hand and his eyes on the road ahead. At a red light on Michigan Avenue, she said, "He loved you, you know, in his way." Luca was quiet for a moment. "I know. It doesn't fix what he did." "No," he said, "it doesn't. But it's true anyway." "Yes," he said, "it is." The light changed. She drove. His phone buzzed Marco, confirming that the families were safe, that Tony and Rosa were holding position, that Father Benedetto had been delivered to a location that was clean and comfortable, and unknown to anyone outside the 3 names Luca had called on the highway. One by one, the pieces of a night that had tried to come completely apart had been held together, not perfectly, not without cost, but held. At 3:47 in the morning, Victor Soren was arrested at his hotel in Chicago's Gold Coast district by a federal team that moved with the precision and speed of a unit that had been ready for exactly this moment for a very long time and had finally been given the thing it needed to act. Hendricks made the call himself. He would say later in the report he filed in the conversation he eventually had with Scarlett that neither of them enjoyed, and both of them needed, that the case had been waiting for something solid for 4 years, and that solid had arrived from a direction he had not anticipated, assembled by a woman working alone on her own grief in her own time, and that he intended to make sure the record reflected that accurately. The record reflected it accurately. At 4:15 in the morning, Dante Moretti opened his apartment door to 2 federal agents and cooperated fully. He sat at his own kitchen table and answered every question put to him for 6 hours straight. He held nothing back. The decryption key opened the drive. The drive confirmed the transfer documentation. The transfer documentation connected to the account structures, and the account structures connected to 11 separate ongoing federal cases in 4 states that had been stalled for years, waiting for exactly this central link. It did not fix what Dante had done. It did not bring back the people on the targeting list who had spent a terrifying night in transit, or Carlo Benedetti, who had died in a parking garage, or Diana Reyes, who had died on an icy road that was not an accident. It did not repair what had broken between 2 brothers in an apartment on Michigan Avenue at 3 in the morning. But it was something. In a night that had tried to be nothing, it was something real. Scarlett sat in a waiting room while a doctor she trusted worked on Luca's wound properly with real equipment and real sutures and the kind of professional thoroughness that her parking garage stitches had been a reasonable but insufficient substitute for. She sat with her phone in her lap and her file open on the screen, the file she had been building for 11 months, which was now in federal hands, which was now official record, which was now doing the work she had built it to do. She read through it one last time, not looking for anything, not checking, just reading. The way you read something that has been with you so long, it has become part of the architecture of your days. And now it is finished, and you are reading it the way you look at a place before you leave it. Diana was on every page, not as a victim. As an agent, a professional, a woman who had been doing her job with skill and integrity, and who had gotten close enough to something real that it had gotten her killed. That was the truth of it, documented and verified, and signed by a federal agent who would now put his name on it officially. Diana Reyes had not died in an accident. Diana Reyes had died doing her job, and the people responsible were going to answer for it. And the file that proved it had been built by her sister in restaurant aprons and borrowed apartments and stairwell windows, one careful entry at a time, across 11 months of grief that had been redirected into the most productive and determined and quietly devastating act of love that Scarlett knew how to perform. She closed the file. She sat in the quiet of the waiting room and closed her eyes for the first time all night, and she let herself feel it. Not all of it, not yet, not here, but enough. She let enough of it arrive that she could breathe around it. The loss, the completion, the strange and specific exhaustion of arriving somewhere you have been walking toward for so long that your legs do not immediately understand they are allowed to stop. She breathed. When Luca came out, he moved carefully, but without the particular compression she had been watching all night, the way a man manages pain by routing it through his will rather than his body. The doctor had given him something for the wound and something for the pain, and told him firmly that he needed 3 days of complete rest, which he had nodded at in a way that satisfied the doctor and meant very little in terms of his actual intentions. He sat down next to her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "Marco says the families are all settled. Tony is staying with them through the morning." He paused. "Father Benedetto made breakfast for everyone at 4 a.m. "Of course he did," she said. "Rosa is handling the communications, making sure our people know what happened. The real version, not whatever Dante's people were going to tell them." He paused. "She said to tell you that Diana's name is going to mean something to a lot of people who didn't know it before. That the people in this family, the ones who have been part of it for years, the ones who have families and ordinary lives built around the protection the name was supposed to provide, they're going to know what Diana Reyes was trying to do. And they're going to know that someone finished it." Scarlett looked at her hands. "That's yeah," she stopped. "Tell Rosa thank you." "Tell her yourself," he said. "I think you should meet her." She looked at him. "When this settles," he said, "when you've slept and Soren is processed and the legal machinery has started and everything is moving the way it's going to move, when there's a morning that isn't tonight." He looked at her steadily. "I'd like you to meet the people who make up what's left of what I built. The real ones. The ones who are still here." He paused. "I think you'd like them, and I think they need to know who you are." She was quiet for a moment. "Who am I?" she said. It was not self-pity. It was a genuine question. The question of a person who has spent so long being defined by a mission that the end of the mission leaves the definition uncertain. "Someone who walked out of a stairwell," he said, "when she didn't have to. Someone who spent 11 months doing something hard and necessary and completely alone because it needed to be done, and she was the one who could do it." He held her gaze. "Someone who finished what her sister started." The waiting room was quiet. Outside, Chicago was beginning its slow turn toward morning, the particular shift in the dark that happens around 5 a.m., when night begins the negotiations that end in dawn. Scarlett Reyes had started this night as a woman standing in a stairwell window, watching something she recognized as wrong. She was ending it as a woman sitting in a waiting room next to a man who was alive because she had stepped out of the shadows with a closed file on her phone and a federal case in motion, and her sister's name on the right side of the record. She had not fixed everything. She had not undone anything. The losses were what they were and would remain what they were, and no amount of correct paperwork or federal prosecution changed the specific shape of a grief that had become so familiar it lived in her body like a second skeleton. But she had done it. She had gone all the way to the end of what she could do. She had finished it. "All right," she said. Luca looked at her. "Introduce me to your people," she said, "when there's a morning that isn't tonight." He nodded. Outside, the city was still moving. It would always be moving. That was the thing about Chicago. It did not pause for your crises or your resolutions or your moments of arrival. It kept its own rhythm, regardless, vast and indifferent, and in its indifference, strangely honest. Scarlett Reyes and Luca Moretti sat in a waiting room as the city moved around them, and they were both still standing, and the night that had tried its hardest to end them had not succeeded, and the morning was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. They were ready for it. That was enough. After everything, the garage, the blood, the drive, the highway, the brother, the file, the name finally written correctly in an official record, that was exactly enough. They were ready, and the morning came.